Eswatini has been rocked by a wave of pro-democracy demonstrations again this week. The protests this week included demonstrations by school students, in fact, who were chanting "Mswati must fall" and "release our MPs." That's a reference to two lawmakers who were arrested during anti-monarchy protests this year. Dozens of people have been killed since the protests began a few months ago. Most of them were killed allegedly by government forces. To respond to this, then, we're joined by the Minister of Commerce in Eswatini, Manqoba Khumalo. Minister, very good evening to you. Thank you for being on Newzroom Afrika. Firstly, give us a sense of your understanding of what's going on in Eswatini currently.
Thembekile, thank you very much. We are still in meetings at the present moment with the special envoy from the SADC Troika sent by President Ramaphosa, Minister Jeff Hadebe, and we are working through a number of issues related to some of the issues that you've just highlighted. We do want to say we are not pleased at all as the government of the Kingdom of Eswatini with the status quo. We are really regretful of the loss of lives and the loss of property and the disruption of schools and the education system in Eswatini. And we are working together to forge a way forward and find a sustainable solution that will ensure that inclusive dialogue is actually commenced sooner rather than later, so that all Mswati can agree on how the constitution can be refined to represent their aspirations.
Allow me to come in there. So what are the specific points of discussion with the SADC delegation? What are you discussing as we speak tonight?
First of all, it is what constitutes an inclusive, an all-inclusive dialogue. It's very paramount for the special envoy in particular to ensure that all Mswati are part of this dialogue. It is also very key for His Majesty and His Majesty's government to make sure that the environment under which this dialogue is held is proper and is devoid of threats, violence and intimidation, so that there is no voice that is subdued. And thirdly, it is how we can quell the current state of affairs and make sure that the temperature is dropped and a state of normalcy resumes, so that all the kids can go back to school soonest, and businesses can continue to operate without intimidation, and we, most importantly, stop the loss of lives through all the confrontations that happen as the violence and the protests unfold. It is not serving anybody's interest to maintain the current status quo.
So some of the people we've been speaking to are either activists or have been out on the street, say their demands are clear. They want an introduction of democratic reforms to governance in Eswatini, among which would be King Mswati relinquishing power and influence over the running of the state. Will you give them that? Will the king relinquish his influence and power?
On a number of platforms and in many different occasions, His Majesty has said that he wants the Mswati people to come together and engage in meaningful dialogue with the view of agreeing how we can change the constitution. Currently, His Majesty's powers are enshrined in the constitution, which was enacted in 2005 after a 2-year consultative process that included all Mswati who were willing to participate. So you cannot make those changes without changing the constitution.
Let me ask you this way, sir. Pardon me.
Let me just, Thembekile, let me just say one more thing. You cannot change the constitution without a process of inclusive dialogue. So the steps are inclusive dialogue. We change the constitution according to the will of the majority. That will define His Majesty's powers and how government is going to be shaped.
But as we sit tonight, is King Mswati open to relinquishing power through a constitutional reform process? Is that conversation happening?
Absolutely, and he reiterated that to the special envoy, and he has said that on the 6th of July at our Sibaya. Recently, he said that to the United Nations General Assembly, where he was represented by the Prime Minister, and in his remarks, he reiterated again his commitment to dialogue. So there is nothing stopping us from engaging in dialogue. It is just the modalities of how we do it, and the environment has to be conducive for that dialogue so that every voice can feel that they are fairly represented in the process. And we are deeply appealing to all Mswati to ensure that we collectively dial down on the temperature and allow an environment where this dialogue can commence. It is not a process that can be short-circuited. It's a process that would take, similar to the last process, a minimum of 12 to 24 months, because every Eswati will be given an opportunity to voice out how they want the constitution to be changed. You can't talk about what changes the constitution will entail before you've actually heard all Mswati.
Why are security forces shooting at demonstrators and tear gassing people on buses when the government is saying it wants a dialing down of the temperature and for dialogue to happen? Because surely you cannot expect citizens and activists to negotiate with a government that has forces out on the streets beating, shooting and assaulting people in other ways.
There has been many reports of how our armed forces, our police in particular, have responded to some of the violent actions and the protest actions that have been seen in the country. But my job today really is to appeal to all Mswati to say, as much as we may have varying views of how we want to shape our future, when schools are being burnt down, when businesses are being burnt down, when transportation is being burnt down, and looting is happening, and vandalism is happening, and threats being perpetrated, and in recent instances, people coming out to declare that they are now an interim government, it does not help. And when then there's those confrontations, this unnecessary loss of life,
Minister Khumalo,
which we regret.
Are you saying all of that justifies shooting at a group of nurses who had just gathered, tear gassing demonstrators who are on a bus traveling to the capital? Are you saying everything you've outlined makes that use of force proportionate?
Nothing justifies any form of violence. So that is absolutely not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that when the environment has been allowed to become as toxic as it is now in Eswatini, it is very hard to contain both sides to such an extent that the action and the reaction tends to be disproportionate. And we are not at all condoning any kind of excessive use of force by our law enforcement.
So you concede that security forces have abused civilians. Do you concede?
Sorry, say that again?
Do you concede that security forces have indeed abused civilians and are currently being accused of killing dozens of people?
There are reports that have been shared. I don't have all the information in terms of the numbers and the extent of the injuries or even deaths, as you may propose. But the key issue here is, if we continue engaging or not engaging that the way we have been, the environment then that gets created is so toxic.
But do you concede, sir, what I'm trying to get out of you is whether you concede that they have abused their powers, the security forces?
Can you please allow me to make my point, because I am answering your question. So the point is, you are speaking of that incident, very unfortunate incident that you are quoting. And again, I will say, we are not proud of such incidents when we see them, but they are a result of a culmination of a number of activities that are necessitated and precipitated by other activities where, during the night a school will be burning. And then, our security forces will have information about intended activities that they are trying to prevent. And in so doing, there may be casualties that then we have to deal with as a country. And some people, some innocent people, in certain cases, may be caught in crossfire. But,
which is unacceptable. Do you agree?
And that is very unacceptable.
Okay.
But what is also unacceptable, Tembegile, is people going around torching schools. That's unacceptable. People going to newly built laboratories and just setting them alight, going to libraries in schools and setting them alight, going to businesses, setting them alight. So it keeps everything on the knife's edge. And when that happens, that environment will unfortunately have casualties
Minister Khumalo,
that we don't need in the country.
So here's what is unlikely to pacify the people who are out demonstrating in Eswatini at the moment. You speak quite elaborately in condemnation of the behavior of people who are torching schools and other infrastructure. And you're right, because that is infrastructure that many of the poor people in Eswatini are going to have to depend on at another level, right? Yet I'm not hearing you say anything as extensively about the conduct of security forces who are accused of carrying out these abuses. How many of the police members, how many of the military forces have been arrested, investigated for their alleged involvement in the beatings and in the killings of these dozens of people?
Well, it's an ongoing situation. I'll make an example. In a place called Lomahasha, a policeman pulled out his gun and killed 2 people, and he was immediately arrested in Eswatini. In another incident, there was an allegation of a policeman who torched up a place, and he was immediately arrested. In another incident, there were allegations of a university student who is alleged to have been killed by the police, and that entire issue is being investigated. Specifically on the riots, the Human Rights Commission is working on the allegations and is gathering the evidence. And if there's any actions that were taken that were not justified by the situation that was being addressed, that will be dealt with appropriately. However, I do need to say that it is a wrong characterization to say we are less concerned about the loss of life. We are.
We're running out of time, so pardon me for interrupting you.
The main reason, Tembegile, that I am saying we are appealing for calm, we are appealing for restoration of law and order in Eswatini. We are appealing for us to remember that we can use our constitution. Is because of this exact reason. We cannot afford to keep losing lives because of the environments that get created when this anarchy is left to thrive.
Quick final one. Do you accept that it is wholly inadequate that tonight you've only been able to give us 3 examples of where action was taken against police officers when dozens of deaths have been reported and security forces blamed for them?
I have faith in our system. And it is still a live situation, as you know. And that being the case, the focus is really on keeping everybody in the country calm and bringing everybody to the realization that if we keep at each other's throats...
But these people, sir, some of them were beaten, killed and maimed in June. How long must they wait for justice?
Well, it will be immediate. It has to be. I mean, like I've said, the Human Rights Commission is working on these issues. In fact, on Tuesday, this past Tuesday, they were presenting to us in government how far along they are with the process of the investigations. But at the same time, please know that it is important for us to talk about the fact that let us dial down the temperature, because if we don't, we will keep, talking about the fact that there are riots and then, there are, our armed forces responding, and then in the process, people get hurt.
Minister Khumalo.
My final comment, I'm appealing to all in Mswati. Let us please stop the current toxic environment so that we can restore a process, an environment that will allow a process for us to engage.
And hopefully you will then, as the government, unblock the internet, which has been restricted so that people in Eswatini are able to express them freely at this time. But Minister of Commerce in Eswatini, Mangoba Khumalo, good to speak to you, so we'll be calling upon you again in the coming weeks until all of this has been addressed. For now